Thanks, Judy. I want you to imagine you're 20 years old and it's the after your junior year in college, and you are offered an opportunity to go on an archaeological dig for the summer in Jordan. How many of you would accept that offer? Wow, there are a lot of romantics out there. Yeah. Well, that offer was made to me by my father. And he was an archaeologist. That's what he did all the time. That was every summer he went away on a dig, and he had never taken me, my mother, or my sister on a dig. So we just thought that that's what he did, and it seemed very dry and dusty to us. And I had no interest in his field languages. I was not interested in Akkadian, Sumerian. I knew nothing about that. And so I really wasn't. And I didn't have any skills. I didn't know Iron Age, Bronze Age. But my father he missed me because he didn't see me all year. I was in college, and he said, I'd like you to come. I've asked Mr. Pugh. Now, Mr. Pugh was the J. Howard Pugh, president of Sun Oil and Pugh Foundation, was the bankroll for this expedition. And he wrote all the checks. So he said, sure, take your daughter if you want to. It was pure nepotism, but it worked. And then my father did a little bribery, and he said, if you go along, I'll take you to Florence at the end. And I was studying Renaissance painting, so I was really keen to go to Florence. And I thought, well, that'll be the payoff. I'll do this job and I'll go to Florence. So I'm going to begin and end in the same place of this trip, and that is the bar of the St. George Hotel in Beirut. We landed in Beirut, and in 1960, it was a beautiful city. I mean, it was just full of people, Aramco people coming to buy jewelry, watches, whatnot. And it was full of people on leave, journalists, Americans at the American University, all that sort of thing. So when I landed in the Beirut airport, I immediately realized this is not like Europe. That it was chaotic. There were no queues, there were no lines. This is a whole different world. So we got in the car or cab and drove past the refugee camps up the of the Mediterranean, and we stopped at the St. George Hotel, which is a beautiful hotel. And we were going to spend the night there. And my father said, we'll go to the bar first. We'll see Serafian. Serafian always pretends like he's just seen you yesterday, but you might not have seen him for 2 or 3 years. It'll always be there. So we walked into the bar, and there was Mr. Serafian. And Serafian greeted my father in a very non-committal way. I think he was always in the bar. He was an antiquities dealer, and he was there doing his business, which I guess he did day and night. And the bar was full of all kinds, journalists, Aramco people, tourists, and I think spies. And I thought, this is really great. So the next morning, after a lovely night spent in Beirut, we got on a smaller plane and flew to Jerusalem. And we were met at the airport by Miss Hallaby. Now, if it weren't that Miss Hallaby and my father were both respectable people, I would say that she was his office wife. And she was a sturdy, olive skinned person with dark brown eyes and a very serious face. But when she smiled, her whole smile was slow, but it lit up her whole face. And she was there waiting for us to take us to our lodging, which was the American School of Oriental Research, in her little little blue Hillman Mix. Now, I do want to give you a little background about Miss Hallaby because she's pretty important to the story. She had an Arab father and a Russian mother. She had a title. She worked, let me read out the title. I have to read it out. She was post-war administrative assistant in the financial secretary's office of the Palestine government, which was a long title. But what she was involved in was getting people in and out the Mandelbaum Gate, which was the one entrance back and forth between Jordan and Israel. So it was extremely important job. And she had been the only woman member of the Arab Legion, and she had worn the khaki uniform of the Arab Legion. And so she had a lot of connections. After the hostilities ceased in 1948, she lived with her sister, Sophia Hallaby, in a little bungalow on the Jordanian side of the wall, looking back to their old house on the Israel side. She took up a job of teaching refugee girls embroidery, which gave them a purpose in life. This was a lost generation. Example of which is on these little guest towels she made for my father, the girls did, with symbols from our excavation. And so by the time, tourists started coming back, they were buying these embroidered linens. They're beautifully done. And it was a thriving industry. She had nothing really, she was a person that liked to do things. And my father asked her if she would be interested in help catalog things for the expedition. And she agreed and became the full-time volunteer for 4 seasons at LG. So she was there. She was going to be a very important person in my life. The place she took us to was the American School of Oriental Research, which is kind of like a hostel for archaeologists. It had rooms that were clean. There was a little sink in each room, a bed, a desk, a chair, and you could have a hot bath twice a week. And the toilet was down the hall. But they also they did meals. They served good, clean meals, which didn't make people sick. They washed everything properly and cooked all the vegetables. And so we were able to eat there. It wasn't very exciting, but at least we didn't get sick. So this was a center for archaeology in Jerusalem, and most of the staff put up there. The first thing we did in the first day that we were there, my father took me into the old city and the souk he had to buy wheelbarrows. He had little running short of wheelbarrows and baskets and picks and that sort of thing. Well, when you walk into the old city, it's just amazing how different it is, especially the souk. Here we're used to shopping, looking at things. Here it was no pedestrian, no cars, just all pedestrian, donkeys, all kinds of things, even corpses being carried through the street, and always little boys running after you, trying to lure you into somebody's shop, and the aggressive marketing that took place. And I quickly learned a few things my father taught me. When they're after you, and they're saying, look at this, you just go, which is kind of not polite, but it means no, thank you. And the other strategy is to hire your own little boy at the beginning, and he will chase all the other little boys away, and he will carry your packages with you. So we had that business of buying the hardware, but also Miss Hallaby had decreed that I was not to wear slacks or shorts on the date. I had to have a skirt, and it was going to be a khaki skirt with big pockets where I could keep my notebook and my pencil. And my father said, okay, I know a very good tailor in the old city. He runs up little vests for me all the time. We'll go to him, we'll have it for you the next day. So we went to this tailor. He measured me around the waist. He measured the length of my skirt. And the next day, a beautiful khaki skirt was ready for me. One problem, the tailor had never made a skirt for a woman before, and he didn't allow for hips. And the thing went straight down from the waist, and I couldn't get it on. And so adjustments had to be made. But I sort of felt that skirt was somehow symbolic of how things were going to be tough to adjust to. So a skirt was finally adjusted so that I could have the proper gear. And Ms. Hallaby also said that I should get a bandana to wear over my hair to keep the dust out. Meanwhile, the next day, our crew, or not our crew, the staff of the expedition was coming in. Most of them were professionals. One of them, just to give you an idea, her name was Diana Kirkbride. She was British, and she had been excavating with Kathleen Kenyon at Jericho. So she was she had digs in her own right, and she was very interesting. She had a face that looked like saddle leather from being out in the sun all these years, and also smoking to keep the flies away. So she she was a pretty tough old bird, but really she was interesting. And then we had Arnold Kuschka. He was a German archaeologist. He always carried a briefcase, an Aktentasche. He never went anywhere without his Aktentasche. Then we had a local surveyor who had worked for several years with us, Miss Hallaby, of course, Ken Short, a graduate student, a draftsman, and then me. So the next day, after we had gotten our supplies together, we set out for Elchi, which is it's a little village 8 miles from Jerusalem. You go on a fairly decent road, and then you get off on a dirt road, and then you have to hold on tight because it's a really rocky road after that, going up to the village. It goes up past the threshing floor to the little village, which is just a bunch of stone houses in ruins, some of them built into old ruins, but others simple dwellings with, just shelters really. And you could see driving up the hill as you bumped up, the women carrying on their heads gallons of water because the spring was outside the village and they had to carry up every single bit of water. No running water, no electricity, no sewers. The UN or somebody had given them porta potties, but they just sat around totally unused. So this was extremely primitive. So we were going to have a meeting for the final negotiations in the Mukhtar's house. Mukhtar is the mayor. So Miss Hallaby was along, as she was an excellent translator, and we went in, dirt floors, chickens coming in and out. There were little stools to sit on, and the Mukhtar was saying, oh, all the men were dressed like somebody out of a Sunday school pageant. You know, it looked like Christmas Eve. They were all wearing these long robes and all that sort of thing. And so the Mukhtar had, I think, 2 wives. One of his wives, the most favorite, passed out the coffee. The coffee is always coming out. Oh, always. That's the first thing. Miraculously, coffee appears. So we all sat, and the Mukhtar had a sort of square face, and he was a little ominous looking. And they were haggling over what the price was going to be for the tomato plants or the fig tree or whatever. They had to rent every bit of land from the landowners. And so that meeting went on, and you know, it was huge culture shock. I thought, oh my God, what am I getting into? And Miss Hallaby she took me on as kind of a mentor. She said, first, you have to wear lace-up shoes, but always as you're walking over these stones, keep your ankles loose so you won't stumble. And she showed me how to keep my ankles loose so I wouldn't stumble. And then she had another important thing. She said, when you go to take a pee behind a wall, which is the only way to go, she said, don't put your arm up against the wall because a scorpion, there are a lot of scorpions in those walls and they can run down and bite you. So armed with that knowledge, I thought, well, I'll get ready and we'll start the next day. So now I'll give you a way of which every day went. We got up at 5:30 and the car or the van from the Range Rover, really, it was a 4-wheel vehicle from the American school, left at 6:30. And we usually got there at 7 to begin our day's work before things got too hot. And each person, each supervisor, I was a supervisor, you each have a 5-meter plot, which you are responsible for, and about 12 workmen in this plot. You're not, my father said, no, we had little stools, and that was the only furniture in the Mukhtar's house. He said, but you're not to sit down when any of your men are working. So that meant, it made a lot of sense, but it was hard because there was plenty to do, but you get tired standing out there in the sun all day long. But that's what he insisted, you know, for purposes of morale, you shouldn't sit down when you're having men work. And these fellows had been trained for 4 years. So some of them were pretty good. They knew what they did. They each knew one person had the pick, one person did the trowel work. Well, the trowel work was the really fine stuff, and we had 4 or 5 trained workers from Jericho who were called in to do the really fine trowel work. So your job as a supervisor is to stand there, and every time any little piece of pottery turns up, you have to make a note about, and make a drawing in your notebook where you found it. You have to put it in a basket labeled with the level of the depth of the thing. Yeah, every basket has to be labeled. And so you would have a basket at, say, 1 meter, and then you would have a basket at 1 meter, 1 centimeter, or whatever. You have to keep things. Then the sides have to be kept straight because of what is called stratification. You learning about civilizations, you want to look at the side of the dig like a layer cake and see, oh, these layers of habitation. So that's very important. And finally, you have to give all your instructions in Arabic. So I learned a couple of things in Arabic. Ibhash, dig here. Dugari, keep it straight. Shway, shway, you know. And so I managed to get by with that. So it's very tedious work. Although I will say, you know, and the workmen were jolly and they were very nice. And we did have these super trained workers from Jericho who had worked with Kathleen Kenyon. And one of them, I remember, they spoke English. And one of them came up to me once, very politely said, "Please, ma'am, may I go shit?" I thought, well, at least we have some English going on here. So after the morning's work, they had a tent, and we would all go to the tent for lunch. All the supervisors, draftsmen, architects, whatever. And the school packed this lunch, which was usually what they call bully beef sandwiches, which was kind of like corned beef. It was very, very dry and dull. But each lunch had as its finish a fresh watermelon. Now, the person in charge of the tent, the tools, the workmen, the lunch was a man called Shukri. And Shukri was a landowner, and he got a little bit more money than the actual regular people. And so Shukri always dispensed the watermelon. I like this. The middle of the watermelon, you know, is the best part, the arus, that's what they call it. Not a lot of seeds. That's the best part of a watermelon. You could always tell who was going to be the favorite of the day, who got the arus. And sometimes he would give it to my father, the mudir. Sometimes he would give it to me. So I got to be the honored one, getting the nice part of the watermelon. A little bit more about Shukri. There's a lot more to tell about Shukri, but he owned the land that had the great pool of Gibeon, which had been excavated the first season. This was the spectacular discovery. So he could really get any rent he wanted to. He was doing pretty well locally. So he had enough money that he was able to buy a second wife. And this second wife presented him, alhamdulillah, with a son. And the son he named Dr. Richard. That was my father's name. My father's name was Richard, but Arabs, in the Arabic language, there's no P. So he was known as Dr. Richard. And so this made, and when in the patronymic thing, Shukri then became Abu Dr. Richard, which was confusing but amusing to people. And Mrs. Shukri, the second Mrs. Shukri, or I don't know, became Dr. Richard. And so this namesake, my father had met the bride and given her the bride gift and all that. And every time he would come back, by this time Richard was 2 years old, my father always bought little gifts for him, toys or, some little thing that my mother picked out. And one day I remember Shukri bringing Dr. Richard at lunch, and all the workmen sort of circle around him, and little 2-year-olds stomped around like waving a butter knife, and they were all so pleased that Dr. Richard had been brought forward. So that was an interesting aspect of Shukri, and a little bit more about him later. Don't let me forget to tell you where he ended up. Now, as you can see, the days were very long, very tedious, very hard. And then night, you go get back in the afternoon, you'd have dinner, and if you were lucky, a bath. And then you'd have to spend the evening writing numbers in India ink on little pieces of potsherd or clay, which was boring. And furthermore, all the men, I have to say, in this example, I forgot the Father Mackenzie, who was a Jesuit, and we all called him Abuna, which means our father. That's what the Arabs called him. So we called Father Mackenzie Abuna. They all got sick with dysentery, and the women just kept on. We had to keep late till late at night writing those little things because all the men were feeble and weak anyway. So one day we had visitors occasionally, and I had been there about a month, maybe 6 weeks, and I was standing on the edge. I would stand on the edge of my 5-meter square, and I'd see once a day a plane flying over out of Jerusalem, and I would think, I wish I were on that plane. And so one day I saw a bunch of visitors come up over the hill from the village, and they had cameras around their necks and baseball caps, and they approached where I was standing very cautiously, and they said, "Do you speak English?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "How long have you been here?" I was apparently looking pretty weather beaten by that time. So that we had occasional visitors. One very exciting day, we had the King of Jordan come on a state visit. And he was making a tour of the West Bank and the tribes on the West Bank that he knew. So he came up in a Jeep. He was wearing his military uniform, his keffiyeh. He was standing up in the Jeep as it made its bumpy way along the road. King Hussein was a rather short man, you probably remember, but also very dignified with huge booming voice. Anyway, he was standing in his beautiful keffiyeh and his uniform in his Jeep, and he made his way up through the bumpy road. And the men of the village stood by the side of the road, and they yelled, "Marhaba, Malik Hussein, Marhaba, Malik Hussein." In other words, welcome, King Hussein. And you know what they did? they cut down branches and threw them in his way. So that gives you an idea of some of the things that carry on like that. I think when I'm looking at the end of the dig, it finally came to an end. We had already discovered sort of all the things we were going to discover, but it was a 10-week dig and we kept on till the very end. What happens is that when you dig in Jordan, you have to have a license, and you have to work with the government very, very carefully. And in a way, Miss Hallaby was also important with that because she had acted as a liaison. She was very much went back to the mandate. She knew how to get along with the government people, and she also actually gave little dinner parties to which Jordanian officers would come, or like the director of antiquities, Auni Dajani, would come. And these were always all male dinner parties. And you never asked how their wives were. They always had some indisposition, but they were all very male, and they were all beautifully served in a little house, and ended with sticky little drinks at the end. And they're very nice, but no women. But that was part of one other thing that Asia did for us. She also helped me in a lot of ways on the day when I'm off and sightseeing, because my father had no time to take me sightseeing. We went to Bethlehem one day, and I recall that we saw the church of the Holy Nativity, and it wasn't what I expected at all. It was dark, and it was a cave, and it had a lot of candles in it. And Miss Hallaby, I was surprised at her devout Christianity. She lit candles and prayed very seriously all around the Church of the Holy Nativity. And as a Protestant, I thought, well, this doesn't look like these creches we get at Christmas. And so they have, actually, in Bethlehem, they have made a sort of Protestant scene, which is more outdoors, which is a garden, which is more in the Protestant tradition. And Miss Hallaby also took me to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And explained that is the the holiest place in the Holy Land or whatever, and it's divided up between Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Catholics, and Copts, and they need a Muslim to keep everybody in order, because otherwise they're all fighting each other all the time. And the Copts have they're the earliest Christians. They have a little rooftop thing on that. That's all they get. So all these places were very different from what I had expected. I'll just talk a little bit about the end of the dig. And as I said, the government, it's important, the government comes in. You put all your stuff that you've dug up, all the potsherds, everything, on these long tables, and the director of the antiquities comes in, and he takes everything that he wants. He gets the first dibs for everything in the museum in Amman. And then my father got to take everything he wanted for the museum in Philadelphia, which was the University of Pennsylvania Museum. So they cover up all the things, that they put it all back. They put back all the dirt that they have disturbed so that the fields again are ready for tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever is going to be grown there. And at the end of the dig, we had a big, well, not big, dinner in the old city at a place called run by Polish nuns called Dom Polski, and the Polish nuns did a terrific dinner, and it was just lovely because in the old city, in the evening, and the Lutheran churches, they come out and they play trumpets and trombones. They play hymns from the roof, and it echoes across the walls of the whole city. So it was quite a nice ending. I want to talk about three things that I learned from the village. First is a patriarchal system. When they asked my father if he had any children, he'd say 2 daughters. Oh, they give you, that's too bad. That is too bad. Daughters are just not important. And I think that it was quite sweet in a way that Shukri gave my father Dr. Britchard, even if it was kind of sideways. Because later, 11 years after the dig ended at Gibeon, my father got a call from Shukri. He was in Brooklyn, and he learned the story. I said, well, I'm coming to see you right away, and he got on the train and went up to New York. He was in Philadelphia, and his cousin, who was also a worker at LG, had managed to get sponsored to come over here to the United States. And he made enough money selling watches in the Reading Terminal Market to buy a grocery store in Brooklyn. And then when he got the grocery store, he brought over Shukri, his 2 wives, and Dr. Britchard. And so it's kind of nice to think that somewhere in Brooklyn, some 65-year-old man is wandering around, and they probably call him Rich, but he's Dr. Britchard. So that tells you a little bit about how important sons are. The other thing I want to talk about is hospitality. Coffee, whenever you go anyplace, you are always offered coffee immediately. It just appears mysteriously, and it keeps coming until you tell them to stop. And the hospitality, it's full. I think if you read the story of Abraham and those 3 people who come to him, wow, does he give them a good dinner? He has Sarah, his wife, makes the bread, then he kills a calf, he feeds these people. This is part of their whole life, hospitality. And the other thing is, part of it is generosity. And I tried to get to know some people in the village. I saw a young woman who was about my age, and she was wearing the typical costume. I hope I'm not getting typical costume, which had a embroidered front. And I said, "Oh, that's pretty." And a couple days later, she comes up and presents me with a beautifully embroidered piece that she's made with the paper pattern still on the back of it, giving it to me. She did, I mean, that's all she had, and she gave it. And I thought, well, this is very peasanty, isn't it? But very nice. And I said to Bob, we were later, many years later, we were in Mexico City and visiting some Arab friends of my father's. And I said, Del Bob, you don't need to worry about it because these are very sophisticated people. You can just act naturally. And so I at lunch, I said, oh, I love these green glass Mexican glasses that are made locally. And she said, oh, that's fine. When we left, the maid had packed them up and they were by the door for me. So if you ever go to an Arab house, never admire anything or it will be given to you. So patriarchy, hospitality, the few words I've learned that are part of my thinking now, one is inshallah, no future is ever mentioned without that word. I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. And this is a way of thinking which is it's usually a good thing you're looking forward to. But it's part of their whole, everything is inshallah. It makes time a little bit fluid. And it also, just for example, back with time and the hospitality, my father told me that in Beirut, if you're invited to a party, it would never say 5 to 7 because they would never indicate that there was any time the hospitality would end. So this is kind of and so time, and you don't always get places on time. You're always late. Then the other thing is alhamdulillah, which means thanks be to God. And that's also, we say it, thank goodness, all the time, but we don't say it quite as much as they do. So having gone through these big cultural events, finally the dig ended and we flew back to the St. George in Beirut. And we walked into the bar of the St. George in Beirut. And there was Mr. Serafian. Oh, by the way, he had surreptitiously sold my father this Persian Bronze Age warrior, which he didn't really need to buy, and I shouldn't have it either, but there it is. There was Serafian, and I ordered a Tom Collins, and I took one sip of that cold, refreshing alcoholic drink, and I felt myself sinking to the floor. And I thought, he really is a spy, and he's drugging me. And as I was about to faint away, my father was scared to death. He dragged me to the elevator, took me up to the room, called the doctor from the hotel, who said that maybe I was dehydrated, maybe I was anemic, but I should eat lots of steak and I would be okay. And I did eventually. I got better, so I did actually go on to Florence and do quite a rigorous trip. However, I don't think it was anything physical. I think it was just that shock of coming back to civilization after having been in that foreign place for so long that that got to me. And it was just letting go. Hey, I'm back in the real world. And it was just such a shock that it was hard to make that transition. So I thank you all for listening to my ramblings, and it's been wonderful for me to go over these memories in my mind again. And I thank you all for coming and listening.